Hey, sixth grade, chapter 19 was long, so I had to cut it into to two parts. So this is the second half, chapter 19, A Bud Not Buddy, written by Christopher Paul Curtis. So we're going to continue with this. We're, I guess, 4 pages out from being done with the book. So I'm going to go ahead and finish reading it. Steady Eddie said, "Man, get out of here." I picked up both of my mama's pictures, my horn, and the can of Brasso and ran upstairs. When I got upstairs, I saw that Herman E. Calloway's door was still open a crack. Miss Thomas's door was closed now, and I could hear the two of them in her room talking real soft to each other. I could have stood outside the door and listened if I wanted to, but that would have been rude. Besides, I didn't know for sure how long it would take for me to polish up my new horn. I went inside my mother's room and put my sacks on the bed that Mama used to sleep in when she was a little girl. I put her smiling picture on the dressing table, then reached under her bed and pulled my sex case out again and snapped the two silver snaps and started taking out all of my things. I took out my old blanket, remade my bed with it. I wasn't going to need to carry it around with me anymore. I opened the tobacco pouch and took out the rock that said Flint on it and set it on the bed. I took the pouch and the flyers and walked down the hall to Herman E. Calloway's room. Even though I could still hear him and Miss Thomas's talking and boo-hooing in her room, I knocked on his door anyway. When no one answered it, I opened it. He had one of those dressing tables with a mirror stuck on the back of it too. So I walked real quick over to it and set the flyers and the bag of 4 rocks down. I got out of his room as fast as I could. Whew. Even though it was me who carried them around for all those years, you'd have to be a pretty big liar if you'd say those rocks and flyers really belonged to me. Herman E. Calloway's name was all over the flyers, and his writing was all over the rocks. Besides, the way he looked so shook up when he saw those rocks for the first time, I figured they meant more to him than they did to me anyway. I went back over to Mama's dressing table and opened the little drawer. I took one of the thumbtacks out and went back to Mama's bed. Next, I took out the envelope that had her picture in it. I took out the picture of her riding the sad, saggy pony. I still couldn't see what she was so unhappy about. The Miss B Godden Moon Park looked like somewhere you could have a lot of fun. I poked the thumbtack into the top of Mama's picture and walked to the wall that she stuck all the pictures of horses on. I put Mom right amongst all those ponies and horses she liked so much. I didn't need to carry that doggone picture around. This wasn't how I remembered Mama anyway. Mama was always excited and jumpy, not sad and pokey like the little girl. Mama was kind of old when I met her too. She wasn't young like this picture at all. The picture looked like it belonged. It's strange the way things turn out. Here I'd been carrying Mama around for all this time, and I finally put her somewhere where she wanted to be, back in her own room, back amongst all her horses. I went back to the bed and picked the flint rock up. It was going to be enough. I didn't need the other things with me all the time. I didn't need them to remind me of Mama. I couldn't think about her anymore if there were 100 hours in every day and 1,000 days in every week. I couldn't think of my Mama any better than I already do. All I have to do is remember her hand on my forehead when she'd ask me something like, "Baby, are you sick? Have you got a temperature?" All I have to do is remember Mama letting me dry the dishes after she'd washed them. How she used to say no one in the world could dry a plate the way I could. All I have to do is take 2 or 3 deep breaths and think of all the books she'd read to me at night. And remember that no matter how long it took, she'd read until I went to sleep. Lisa Malone was right. I was carrying Mama inside me, and there wasn't anyone or anything that could take that away and add to it either. The one rock from Flint would be enough. I set it on my sax case. I picked up my saxophone. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I wet the reed the same way I'd seen Steady Eddie do, then clamped it on the mouthpiece. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. If after I got to 10 I blew the horn, it sounded pretty good. I knew I'd be playing along with the dusky devastators of the Depression in a week or two. If I didn't sound so good, it meant I'd have to practice for a couple months before I'd be good enough to get on stage with them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I puffed my cheeks and blew as hard as I could. The saxophone only squeaked, squawked, and groaned. It sounded like it was making up words like "arah" and "ruza" and "balupa." Shucks, maybe I didn't puff my cheeks out right. Maybe I was blowing too hard. I counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This time the horn only squeaked, squawked, and groaned. It didn't sound like it was trying to make up any words. It sounded great. It wasn't perfect like when Steady blew it, but I could tell that one day it was going to be. Something told me I could learn how to play this. Something told me that these sounds were more than just bad notes. If you didn't have a real good imagination, you probably think those noises were the sounds of some kid blowing a horn for the first time, but I knew better than that. I could tell those were the squeaks and squawks of the one floor closing and the other one opening. I looked at the picture of Mama and Miss Thomas gave me. Mama was looking right at me with the same soft smile. I knew it's stupid to smile back at a picture, but I couldn't help myself. I know it's even stupider to talk to a picture, especially when it hadn't said anything to start a conversation. But I had to say, here we go again, Mama. Only this time I can't wait. I closed my eyes and began practicing. Shucks, as good as things were going to as good as things were going for me now, I bet you dollars to donuts that Steady Eddie was going to get here early. Afterward, although Bud, not Buddy, is fictional, many of the situations Bud encounters are based on events that occurred in the 1930s, during a time known as the Great Depression. And although the characters in Bud Not Buddy are fictional as well, some of them too are based on real people. One of the most enjoyable parts of the writing is that an author can combine his or her imagination with the traits of real people to build new characters. That is what I did to create the characters of Lefty Lewis, Herman E. Calloway, both of whom are based loosely on my grandfathers. My mother's father, Earl Lefty Lewis, was one of 6 or 7 redcaps who worked at the train station in Grand Rapids, Michigan during much of the Depression. The jobs of the Pullman porter and the redcap were among the few open to African American men at the time and carried a certain prestige in the black community. Nonetheless, they were extremely difficult jobs, often marked by 80-hour work weeks, low salary, and virtually no job security. These men could be fired for simply not looking happy enough. Grandpa Lewis did exceptionally well during the Depression, supporting his family on the tips he received as a redcap. My mother remembers that my grandmother used to have a sew enforced linings. She used to have to sew reinforced linings into the pockets of all my grandpa's pants because the weight of the pennies, nickels, dimes, and occasional quarters that he was given as tips would eventually rip the seams out. She also remembers the leathery texture of Grandpa's hands took on from carrying so much baggage at the station. As the Depression deepened, the Grand Rapids train station cut back to 2 red caps, and Grandpa was let go. He briefly opened a small restaurant and finally became the first African American cab driver in Grand Rapids, a job he held until his retirement in 1972 at 74 years old. Earl Lefty Lewis also pitched for many years in the minors of the Negro baseball leagues. His fondest memory of the time was pitching twice against Satchel Paige. As he did with most opposing pitchers, Satch hung Grandpa with two losses. My father's father, Herman E. Curtis, was indeed a big band leader for most of his adult life. He headed many different musical groups, my favorite being Herman E. Curtis and the Dusky Devastators of the Depression, a name that by itself deserves 6 of those exclamation points. Grandpa attended the Indiana Conservatory of Music and was classically trained violinist. He also played the bass fiddle, the accordion, and the piano. Entertainment was an important part of life during Depression, for people wanted to forget their troubles by going to the movies, sitting around the radio, and listening and dancing to live music. Grandpa and his bands were well known throughout Michigan during this time. Being an orchestra leader was Grandpa Curtis's nighttime job. By day, he wore many different hats. Among them was those of a chauffeur, a boat captain, a truck painter. He owned several businesses in Grand Rapids and Wyoming, Michigan, at a time when laws prohibited African Americans from renting or holding title to land in those two cities. Grandpa did this by having a white friend put his name on all records. The flexibility, people skills, hustle, and willingness to work around unfair laws and situations that both of my grandfathers used to allow them to keep their families together during one of America's bleakest periods, a time that was especially hard on African Americans. Both of these men were fortunate and skilled enough to avoid the brunt of the Great Depression. The lives of Earl Lefty Lewis and Herman E. Curtis and the situations described in Bud Not Buddy are the exceptions, for the great majority of people suffered horribly during the period between 1929 and 1941. Parents often could not feed their children, so countless thousands of young people, some as young as 8 years old, were abandoned or had to set out on their own in search of a meal and a warm place to sleep. These children survived the brutal life on the road by riding the rails, picking fruit, doing odd jobs, begging, stealing, or whatever was necessary to get food. Much of what I discovered about the Depression I learned through the research of books, which is a shame. I didn't take the advantage of the family history that surrounded me for many years. I'm afraid that when I was younger and my grandparents and parents would start to talk about their lives during the Depression, my eyes would glaze over and I'd think, oh no, not those boring tall tales again. And I'd find the most convenient excuse I could to get away from them. Now I feel a real sorrow when I think of all the knowledge, wisdom, and stories that have been forever lost with the deaths of my grandparents. Be smarter than I was. Go talk to Grandma and Grandpa, Mom and Dad, and other relatives and friends. Discover and remember what they have to say about what they've learned growing up. By keeping their stories alive, you make them and yourself immortal. End of the book. And that kind of makes you think about Steve Jobs and leaving a legacy. That was one of his rules. So that's something I encourage you to do, is to talk to grandparents, especially now that we're dealing with this pandemic. I mean, you could FaceTime, you can give a phone call. They'd be happy to hear from you and to tell you some of the things that they went through when they were younger, when they were your age. Okay, well, this will be the end of our book. Seems like things worked out really well for Bud, not Buddy. Get out there and do something active. and I will see you in the next lesson.